All right. Welcome everyone to one of our last, sadly enough, meetings for the fall semester. I have some announcements before we get started. We've got Les Harbor here with Fyffe Jones Group. And so our announcements are mainly community service based. That's some of our bigger events that we've got left. We've been doing two kind of virtual events, I guess, if you want to call them that. We've got one project with the Wayne County Nursing and Rehabilitation Center that we're doing. And so if those of you who'd like to participate in this event would write 2 letters each. We're writing letters to the residents. With the COVID laws and restrictions and things, they are not able to have visitors and families to pop in and things like they did before. So this would be a huge help to them, to give them some company, give them some companionship in this difficult time that they're going through, that we're all going through. And so for that, if they could be postmarked by the 13th, that would be a huge help to us, because actually the email you received, you're going to be mailing them to me personally, and I'm going to take them to the nursing home in one lump sum, because the letters have to be quarantined for 48 hours before they can be distributed. So the nursing home contact told me to bring them all at once, that way that there's not this lag of certain people get their letters first and then others aren't able to get theirs until later. So that's one project we've got going on right now. Another project that we're getting ready to start is a book drive. It's actually ran through the national office of Beta Alpha Psi. And through that, what we're going to do is we're going to donate 100 books. That's our minimum goal. So we'd like to get 100 books to send to the national organization, which is going to go towards some literacy projects that they've got going on right now, trying to encourage people to get into literacy and pick up and read some books. So for that, we're asking members to do 5 to 10 books each, because we really want to exceed that minimum 100 book I guess requirement per se. And the third thing that we've got going on is we're doing a volunteer day at the Heart of Phoenix this Saturday. And for that, you should have gotten an email asking you to fill out a form. So that's what we're going to use for our head count. So if you are interested in doing that event, please fill out that form. If you need me to send you the form again, I'll be happy to. Just let me know. Hey, I can't find it in my inbox. I need the form again, and I'll be happy to forward it on to you again. And so with that, the volunteer is going to be outside, so hopefully we have good weather, and it's also going to be individualized. So instead of doing projects in groups like we did last year, we're going to do things on an individual basis. That way we can spread out, we can be individualized as far as that goes, but we'll actually get to see each other in person, which will be so cool and such a nice break from all of this Zoom stuff. So to summarize, I know it was a lot of information, but we have the nursing home project for the letters going on. We have the book drive of 5 to 10 books. And for that, we're just going to do that on an individualized basis. If you have books, contact us. We'll get a spot and meet up with you for that. We don't necessarily have a Dropbox set up, because we're not going onto campus hardly at all. So we're just going to do that on an individualized basis. And then we have the Heart of Phoenix coming up this Saturday. So without further ado, Les, you can take it away from here.
What time do you all normally run to, just so I can get an idea of, I don't want to get long-winded and keep you all too late.
We normally go about an hour or so. It depends on the person, the presentation, how the conversation is going. There's really no true limit to it.
All right, well, I'll be more or less speaking about my career to start off with, and that's simply to give you all an idea of what I've experienced and what I've more or less encountered after I've gotten out of college and actually went into the accounting profession. I've bounced around quite a bit in the beginning, actually during school and after getting out of school with my degrees. And I've experienced a little bit little bit of everything. Maybe that's a little broad, but I've worked in nonprofit, I've worked in government, I have worked in for-profit, and now I have settled into public accounting, which is normally the exact opposite of what happens. Normally people begin in public accounting and then jump around afterwards. And with that, I'm going to give you all a brief outline of what I've experienced, how I've taken the different industries in, and my viewpoints of what these are. Everybody's going to have their own viewpoints when they get into this. Everybody's going to have different experiences, and that's mainly because each employer is going to be wildly different. The culture at each work, each firm, each agency is wildly different from others, despite being in, could be even in the same company, the same government, the same firm. And I'll start off with, I started at Marshall just like you all, and I got a little later start simply because I jumped around majors a couple of times. My first semester was computer software engineering. After one semester, I found out that playing with technology is much more fun than working with technology. After that, I spent a semester in graphic design, still being a little technology based and more towards the creative side of things. Again, after a semester of that, I switched and then went into the Lewis College of Business. From there, my first 2 semesters were actually in marketing. I don't know if Mad Men had just came out, or I thought that I was going to be, I thought I was going to be working with, advertisements or other such things. And I quickly learned that most of marketing is salesmanship. And that turned me off after a couple semesters. And during that second semester, I had an accounting class, which for me, I felt like it clicked. I did well in the class with relatively little effort, given it was 101. And then I think I saw Marie's name in here. She was the one that made me realize accounting can actually be a lot of work. And unfortunately, I was too far invested to drop out by then, so I powered through it. And after that, I went through college and got my 150 hours, thanks in no small part to me being wishy-washy in my first few semesters. And after that, I went into, it was actually just because of a connection. I had a friend that I had a couple of my senior classes with. She graduated and went to work as an auditor at the state of West Virginia. So she worked there. She seemed to like it. So I applied and got a job there. And that was actually my first 5 years of working. The government work, I worked 37 and a half hours, if that, a week. I used to work lightly for what I did there. You traveled all over the state, and at my job there, those were mainly compliance and performance audits. And as I've spent over a decade in industry now, I've learned there's multiple types of audits. Have you all had any type of exposure or looking into what a compliance audit is, or a performance audit, or a financial statement audit? Any at all? Well, if not, I'll go through the general basics. And what we did there were we audited against state code. We went in after an event had happened, a project was completed, or an initiative was initiated in some way, shape, or form. And we looked at, did you all do this within compliance of the state code, which is a compliance audit, or if we were looking at results, let's say if they had a new initiative for this new agency to repair X amount of roads, we would look at, that would be a performance audit. How well did you accomplish your goal? How well did you perform over a certain amount of time? So I did that for 5 years. During that time, with government, you normally get a fair amount of free time. Government normally doesn't pay you as much in dollar bills as they do free time. During that time, I actually studied and passed my CPA while I was working for the government. And passing the CPA made me realize all of the parts of accounting that I was not experiencing at government. You get tastes of it while you are in college, but I felt like I didn't exactly have the hands-on experience. That's how I learn best. Some people can pick it up out of a book and just study and immediately jump into it and be good to go. I'm not one of those. I have to get in there and fumble around with it, normally screw up a few things before I figure out how something works. So after about 5 years of state, actually, I believe it was 5 years to the day, because unless the state of West Virginia has changed anything, your retirement fund vests after 5 years. So 5 years on the day, I left the state of West Virginia and I went to work for a nonprofit after as a more or less an assistant to the CFO. It was technically called the controller, but I was more or less an assistant to the CFO. And that only lasted about 4 or 5 months. And that was mainly because a new president was elected of this agency. They came in and the agency, and this is true across the whole state of West Virginia, this nonprofit was having difficulty collecting donations, and their funds were going down. So they did a big sweeping cost cut. And unfortunately, I was one of the ones caught up in that cut. So after that, that was when I decided, all right, well, most of the time, if you're in industry or if you're in an agency of some sort, government, the accountant is support. You are a support staff. So I decided, well, let's go into public accounting where you're the revenue generator. You are, you're the star in the public accounting. You are the one doing the work and making the money. So you have a little bit better job security normally. So I applied around, was able to get a job here in Huntington with an accounting firm. Mainly because I had the CPA already behind my name. And whenever they hired me on, I had to start pretty close to entry level, just because working with government and working with nonprofit, my experience was rather narrow. And that was about 6 years ago. And in the, I would say my first 6 months of working in public accounting, I learned more than I did in 5 years in government. And you see a lot of people go into public accounting right out of the gates as soon as they get out of college. And that's because you work with, depending on the firm, usually hundreds, if not thousands of different clients, different types of jobs, different industries. Eventually you're expected in most firms to form a specialization of some sort, but right out of the gates, you just get thrown almost type of anything: nonprofit, governments, trust foundations, taxations, audits, agreed upon procedures. You experience almost everything, at least in some of the more local and regional firms. Going back to what I said earlier, depending on what firm you join, not only is the culture different from firm to firm, depending on the size and the focus of that firm, your experience will differ wildly. Normally, the larger the firm, from my friends and colleagues that I've gone into bigger firms, it's a little easier to get pigeonholed in something. One of my coworkers actually spent 3 years at Deloitte as soon as he graduated, and he eventually came here to work for us because I think he was in the audit side of things in Deloitte, and I think he worked over 3 years on a total of 4 clients. These are colossal clients, multi-billion-dollar clients, but still you only work with those 4. And a lot of people look at public accounting as the place to go to get your baseline of experience. Even if you are just purely taxation, you're still working with journal entries. You're going to do some pro forma financial statements to make sure everything is looking all right before you start punching in information, hopefully. And getting a basic idea of what's going on with that client, just because you need to have an understanding whenever filling out tax forms, especially for companies. With our size of firm, with Fyffe Jones, I work with primarily the audit side of things. I specialize in nonprofits and governmental entities. Despite working 5 years in government and trying to get away, it seems I cannot. We also work on a few construction contractors, and then a few other smaller manufacturing companies that we perform audits and review for. So even though my specialization is in nonprofits and government, I get my hands dirty with just about a little bit of everything here. The smaller firms, normally you get a pretty good variety. And whenever I say smaller, only around 15 to 25 people is what I'm considering smaller. There are firms that are only maybe a partner and a support staff. So it's really just depending on what you're looking for. Normally, the smaller you are, the smaller the firm, the more variety you get in your workday, just because there aren't, there isn't someone that's just, all I'm going to do is fill out, Form 990s for nonprofits, and there's nothing else because I have so many 990s to fill out. So that's something to keep in mind whenever you're looking at what you're wanting to get into as well. Most people go into public accounting. I feel like most people go into public accounting to get that first taste of what everything's about. They'll spend 2 to 3 years here and then normally reassess what they want to do. Many stay in public accounting. One of the perks is you get to, if you're a nosy person like me, like I said, I'm an auditor, so that kind of goes without saying. You meet multiple different people. You kind of have your ear to the ground with the community. You know what's going on with businesses before a lot of other people do, just because you are in constant contact with multiple different people. Same can be said for tax. You have to have a pretty intimate knowledge of the going-ons with the business and everything. And if you are doing your job, they'll normally come to you for guidance, especially come near the end of the year. Businesses normally don't like paying tax. So we'll do tax planning with them, let them know, are you looking at buying anything? Are you looking at expanding? If so, if you do it within this time frame, you can save tax, or if you're operating at a loss, push that stuff off until next year because you're already operating a loss. You're not going to be paying any tax. Anything that you're eating now, you might be, eroding some net operating loss carry forward you could have. There's a lot of things you can talk about at the end of the year. So I go over all of this to give you an idea of what I've experienced. I spent about 6 months in a for-profit as an internship as well. And I have a few old colleagues that work in for-profits as well. And from my experience, as far as accountants go, if you go into the government, that's normally, and this is going to be different for every individual and every individual, possible employer as well. But usually the government is lower stress, lower pay as well. You get an absolutely ridiculous amount of holidays off. I think the only reason I knew what some holiday dates were in the government was because I got time off with them. And like I said, it's normally a little lower stress. In the middle, usually, is industry. The pay is a little better usually. Also nonprofits. The pay will be a little better than government. There are times when you'll have to put in some elbow grease to get some extra work done, especially if you have, month-end close. We actually, and I say, I give the warning that it's different for everything, because we actually had one of my very good friends that I used to work with. He spent about 5 years in public accounting, and his brother actually left public accounting a year or two before this incident, and he saw that his brother was getting extra time, still getting paid pretty well. So he went to one of our clients and worked for them. And right around that time, the person right above him accepted another job. He got catapulted into that position, and he was working 80 hours a week. So you have to be careful, because not every, I see your question, I'll get to it in a second. Not every industry is, going to be as forgiving. And this is just, in my experience, the average. Public, in general, around this area, does start off, I believe, at a better pay. I would say if you are going straight in out of college into an industry position, you might be looking at anywhere between 35 to 40,000 a year as a pure entry level position. And that's in industry. Government, you're probably looking at 30 to 35. And this is just around this area. We are a lower cost of living area. So your pay is also probably going to be below the national average if you're looking at like Glassdoor or anything like that. Public will there's two, how do I say this? There's two kind of perks into going into public. Public will normally give you higher pay. I would say the average is 45-ish to 50 starting off. depending on, you have your master's, have you interned there, do you have friends, or rather, do they like you, do they already know you, and they know that you're going to be a good fit? You could probably get 45 to 50, I'd say, starting off in public. And the main perk, I believe, about public is you are usually able to move up the ladder. If you are putting in the time, get your CPA, the clients like you, your coworkers like you. Most public accounting want you to move up, simply because, well, let's be honest, if you're my client, who would you rather work with? Somebody that's there for a couple years, associate staff, or do you want to work with the partner? You're going to want as many high-ranking people as you can to be able to have clients with FaceTime. It just makes, makes the clients feel good. They're like, all right, yeah, I'm talking to somebody that can make a decision. Like talking to somebody that can help me out. So normally, public will do everything they can to make sure that you get the experience you need and the training you need to move up as fast as possible. Again, every firm is different, but usually what I've seen is you're looking at 2 to 3 years at the entry level, depending on how fast you're, doing learning work, how fast you're picking things up, how fast you're studying and getting your CPA. And then you'll probably move to a senior position. From senior, I've seen on average 5 to 7 years, and you can make manager from that. And then anywhere from 10 to 15 is partner. And that's usually a pretty standard. That's usually a pretty standard ladder that you're looking at. That's going to be pretty similar with smaller firms to larger firms. Smaller firms normally have a little less hierarchy in it, even though I technically do anything from, I've done staff level work within the last week, and I've done manager to partner level work within the last week. It's really whatever you're capable of doing, and the partners feel that you're not going to mess up. Or if they suspect you're going to mess it up, they're going to give it to you plenty of time before it reaches the client, because they want to see it first. So every firm has their different views, and I've actually been in 2 different public accounting firms. I've spent 3 years with one firm before I was actually contacted by this firm saying they needed an experienced auditor and wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk. So after about a couple weeks of negotiations, I hired on here and immediately was able to jump in with my previous experience. So the skills that you pick up in public transfer very, very easily to either other firms or your clients. If your client has a high level accounting position open up, it'd be a lot better to just go ahead and take the person that you've been working with that knows your business and is actually going to get along with. So we actually, as much as I hate to admit it, public loses a lot of our personnel to clients, just because client knows you've been working with them for the past 5 years. They get a CFO position open up. They don't want to deal with the hiring process. You know their business. They know you. They like you. They're going to oftentimes offer you a position you're hard pressed to put down. And with public, a lot of people actually, prefer to just stay where you're at, because there is that guaranteed move up. CFO positions don't exactly open up every week. If you do get a position at some places like an accounting manager or a controller or something like that, a lot of times, if you can look at the CFO and say, okay, their CFO is making a lot of money, he or she is 50 years old, and they have a lot of family here. All right, I'm looking at 15 years before that position opens up. So you can kind of take a look at that. Whereas public accounting, your path to partner is, okay, well, you go out, you bring in business, you learn the ropes, and after that certain amount of time, that position opens up. It's not really so much as an opening as an opportunity. It's whenever you're ready and you have the prerequisites met, will normally start talking to you about, okay, well, here's what we need you to do to become part owner and a partner with us. So it's a little more open-ended for progress in public accounting as well, I believe. In industry, there's not a lot of places around West Virginia that need 2 CFOs. Some of the bigger energy companies might have that opportunity. But again, public is normally a pretty guaranteed progress, and progressive pay increase, experience increase, and opportunity increase. So in my opinion, I think if I could have done it all over again, I would have skipped that 5 years in government and went right into public accounting, to be honest with you. Still valuable experience because I can actually tell you what normally goes on in government now. But again, I feel like my time could have spent better learning the ropes and getting straight into it. I see other people my age that went straight into public accounting, and I feel like in some areas I am at a deficiency against them. Now, if they wanted to go in and try and get a government client from me, that would be difficult just because I spent 5 years in West Virginia State Code and I can almost quote it to you. So there are advantages no matter where you go. There's really no wrong path so long as you're learning and actually getting paid and putting in work. So there are things you can tweak. If I had the experience, I would have tweaked certain things in my career path. But so long as you're learning and actually working after you get out of here with your degree, then I'd consider that a win, especially with the way things are going right now with the economy and everything. I have way too many acquaintances and friends that aren't able to use their degree. Luckily, accounting, no matter what's happening, you're in pretty good shape. There's always going to be some need for the record keeping and services that we provide. So that is one good news I can share with you at least right now. Other than that, that's a very broad view of what I've seen. I don't want to sit here and just say, public accounting is the only way. Just because I wound up here, and this is where I plan to stay for quite a while, just because I've been here for 6 years. I know the basics of what's going on. I can jump into just about any project with our firm and be assistant be an assist. What am I trying to say? Be helpful and actually assist and not be a burden. And after switching jobs a few times, it's a pain in the neck. I'll be honest with you, learning, even switching from public, firm number one to Fyffe Jones, you still have to pick up a whole new list of clients, get to know them, get to know their industry. So it's a pain. Switching jobs isn't exactly my, favorite thing to do. So with public, you can normally stay where you're at for quite a while. And if you ever do have the, the itch to look for something else, you have a certain, skill set that you can take just about anywhere. Any questions, anything right now?
So I have two possible questions. So the first one being, you talk about how you really specialize in government and nonprofit industries.
Mhm.
So that actually is also an interest of mine. I've interned with a few nonprofits in the past. Is it difficult for it, and this obviously would vary from firm to firm, but is it kind of hard to find that as your niche? Like if that's something that you enjoy, is it hard to get to where you're specializing in that field?
Well, most firms, I see your question, Jonathan. I'll get to it in a second. Most firms, obviously you'll work where you're needed, but they do try and work with you to find your interests. Simply because if we're putting someone on stuff that they don't like, there's a good chance that whenever they do get that opportunity, they're going to take that 48 months or 3 years of training that we've given them and take a hike.
Mhm.
We like to avoid that. Training people is not exactly a good way to make money. You spend more time fixing things and getting them up to speed than you're actually creating efficiency and getting work out. So we normally try to help people work where they like to work. If they like nonprofits, then they will, normally if you join a firm with a lot of nonprofits, make that known whenever you are interviewing. Let them know that you want to, work on nonprofits, and they'll already have an idea of where they're wanting to put you. That's one thing I can't stress enough. Whenever you are actually applying for different firms or jobs, I found, especially whenever I first started off, I found, you're trying to mold yourself to fit that role, which in your best, I mean, it's in your best interest. That's actually detrimental, not only to you, but also to the person, that's thinking of hiring you. Because if you're not happy there, I mean, you're not going to be happy. And then eventually, whenever you leave and they're stuck sitting there having to train someone else up, they're not going to be happy. So, try and be upfront and honest with what you are interested in whenever you're looking for a firm. Well, to address what Jonathan said, do I usually work more than 40 hours a week? The answer is that depends. During this time of year, with November 15th coming up, a lot of 990s are due. We have a few clients that require audits by 11/15. I actually was working right up until I joined this on a governmental audit. I do work more than 40 hours a week, anywhere from 45 to 50 on average until the turn of the year. Actually, for audit functions more like a roller coaster. My time that I spend kind of goes like this on projects, whereas tax looks more like a Richter scale. Whenever tax season comes up, we usually do work more than 40 hours a week. Now, I say usually because my firm, Fyffe Jones, is very good about keeping track of your time. You have a minimum hours that you are required to work every year. During summer, we don't work Fridays. Actually, a lot of people, if they had a particularly rough tax season, they don't work Thursdays and Mondays either. We have to meet a certain amount of hours, depending on your role in the firm, every year. So if you are over that hour limit, then, if summer comes around and you don't have a lot of work to keep you busy, take some time off. It all comes out of the pool. Sometimes work happens and you aren't allowed to take, or not allowed, you aren't really able to take all of your leave. Fyffe Jones also has a policy that, let's say, you're starting off, you have to work 80, so 40 times 52, 80 hours a year, and you get paid 50,000 a year. 80 divided by 50,000, whatever that is your hourly rate. Let's say at the end of the year, you weren't able to take all your vacation. You've got 100 hours just sitting in your bank that you couldn't burn. All right. Let's say your hourly rate is $20. So 100 hours times $20, we write you a check for $2,000 to compensate you for the time that you spent over during the year. So there hasn't been a year where I've had no vacation left. I've normally anywhere from 20 to 80 hours, depending on the year. So especially around this time of year with Christmas coming up and having to buy presents for people, extra cash in your pocket doesn't hurt either. And then kind of to go back to what Max said with the specializations, keeping an eye out for what firms also have these specializations as you're getting closer to graduation helps out too. My firm, Fyffe Jones, has we do a lot of school districts, which are governmental audits. We have quite a few construction and manufacturing clients. We have a lot of car dealerships as well. And then a lot of nonprofits around the area. We do audits and reviews for them as well. So kind of talking to these accounting firms, if you're looking at an accounting firm, saying, okay, what type of work is in your portfolio? What can I expect to be working on? Here are my interests. Are there anything that I'm going to be able to work on that gets me, experience in my interests? Is a good question as well. That's not something we get asked very often. Normally, it's just, all right, am I going to be on tax? Am I going to be on audit? There's a lot more to it than just tax and audit as well. There's different industries and different, agencies. School districts are different than, public service districts. Public service districts are different than social services type districts within the government. So there's a wide range of different topics and areas that you could be working on as well if you're in public accounting. if you go into industry or agency, you know, what you see is what you get. If you're at a nonprofit and their job is to, you know, feed the hungry. All right, well, guess what? You're probably going to be working with a lot of food inventory, spoilage, estimations on how long this will last, shelf life, stuff like that, looking at different costs. You can get a pretty good idea based off of the mission and the purpose of the agency, or if you're going into a manufacturing firm, probably going to be some cost accounting, some cost analyst work, budgeting for different products, especially if we have some manufacturing companies that deal with metals. Copper fluctuates wildly depending on, I don't know what I think they flip a coin to determine what the price is day to day. But, you know, getting an idea of, okay, well, here's the trend, getting an idea of how much to budget for this, how much could it swing? Do we have enough, you know, money left over if it does swing in a bad way? Are we going to lose money on jobs that we have showing up? As you can tell, I can sit here and ramble off a dozen things that you might have to keep an eye out for if you are in industry. And that kind of changes depending on where you go. As an auditor, I have, as you could tell, I rambled off a good amount of things that you have to keep an eye out for. As an auditor, you have that kind of overview knowledge of what's going on. And you have to, as an auditor, to understand the basics of what they're dealing with as far as the actual calculations and being able to budget that, you know, that's kind of on them. We have to know the basics to be able to look at it and say, is this reasonable? Or are you just throwing numbers at me and hoping that I stop asking you for documentation, which actually happens more than I'd like to admit as well. So it's really a lot of things that you could be getting into once you finally get those degrees and start working on it. As far as and getting your CPA, if you do choose to go that route, a lot of industry and government work do not require a CPA. You don't need it to move up. It looks nice on a resume. If you are going up against another equally talented and equally qualified individual, and one of them has the CPA and one of them doesn't, they have an advantage, I believe. Even if that isn't required, it shows that you've spent extra time and have extra knowledge. But I don't know if anybody has really drilled at home, getting the CPA is a lot of work. More work if you are not good at test taking like I am. You know, less work if you are good at test taking and good at studying. I actually waited a year and a half after I graduated before I started studying for my exam, and I had to completely reteach myself to sit down and focus for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours to study. Actually, just sitting down and locking myself in a room and knowing that I'm not going to leave that room until I actually finish was what I had to do eventually. So you really have to, you know, put in the time on that exam too if you want it. And with public accounting, again, it depends on the firm culture, but most firms are going to want you to try to get it within about 2 years. And that's mainly because after 2 years, you can start eyeballing that senior rank to where you've been there for a couple of years, you've been through the routine, you know, a couple of years, and you're starting to get to the point where you can probably lead some projects and probably start having some face time with clients and, you know, helping them out. It helps to have that CPA behind your name because if you're working with a CPA firm, most people expect to be speaking to a CPA. So other things to consider. You know, public gets you that entry-level stuff, but there's a few, you know, caveats that come along with it as well. Anything else? Any more rabbit holes for me to jump down?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Sure.
About specialization. I know you mentioned that you're in audit.
Mm-hmm.
Is it popular at all for any firms to have you do tax and audit throughout the year, or is it normally going to lead to a specialization between one of the two?
Again, that really depends on the firm. My prior firm, I did maybe a couple of 1040s, and that was it. And the rest of my time was spent on audit. With Fyffe Jones, we take a more pairing up a person with a client approach. So I do work for, within the past month, I've wrapped up a few audits for nonprofits and then went straight into their 990 and completed their 990 because I know what happened in the audit. I led their audit from start to finish. I know everything that happened in that audit. So it only makes sense that I'm the one that jumps into the 990 and gets that prepped. Sometimes, depending on schedule, I'll have to delegate that to a staff. And then whenever they send it back up to me, I've done their 990 at least once. So I know what I expect to see in, what pages, what schedules, what supplementary information I expect to see in that 990 as well. So I have the knowledge to review it at least. But again, it depends on the firm. With my prior firm, we did a larger client, and once I got to a certain point in the audit, after I finished a certain point of tests, I notified our tax staff. They would send in a couple of tax staff to the audit team while we were on site, and they would spend about a week pounding out the tax return while we wrapped up all of our checklists and all of our hoops that we have to jump through with the audit. And I never even touched their tax return. So again, it depends on what we are, it depends on what client you're working with as well. A couple clients here, actually, I do their audit, but their tax return gets into very complex territory, just with some of the industries that they focus on. I've taken a look at their tax return, and it made my head spin. Just because, especially whenever you start getting into different vehicle allowances with different depreciation methods, different tax strategies. If we have a client with a particularly complex tax strategy, that's something that normally we have senior level tax specialists take care of that specialize in that industry. But just doing a Form 990 for a nonprofit that I'm able to handle the audit from start to finish on, that's something that routinely happens as well. So again, it depends on the firm, it depends on the client, and it also depends on how much do you want to try and take on tax stuff. I've always taken the approach of, I have the items that I know down pretty well, but if there's something new that I can grab a hold of and learn it, I normally go out of my way to try and grab it. With the 990 stuff, that was something that was just approached to me a couple of years ago. They asked if I wanted to go ahead and complete the 990 as well, and I went ahead and figured it out. A few review notes later, I had it filed and taken care of. And that's one thing that most firms will encourage you to learn as much as you can, just because the more you learn, the more useful you are. It also helps out for you because the more you know and the more you do, the harder you are to get rid of. So that's it goes both ways, and it's really just how willing are you to learn. Most firms are impressed by people that will go out of their way to, if they haven't done something before, they will ask for it. Hey, can I do the 990 this year? I want to try and figure it out. Most firms will say either yes or let's not start you off on that one. We have a better one that you can start off on. We'll get you started and get you learning that particular area. So most firms, will work with you to help you gain expertise in the areas that you want. Is there any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
You've worked in various types of accounting, as you mentioned. How did you know which one was the best fit for you? Like, how did you end up in the auditing sector that you're in?
Well, frankly, I tumbled into it. I spent 5 years doing audits at the state, and so whenever I came into public accounting, they said, hey, you've got your CPA, but as far as what public accounting actually does, you're still kind of green in certain areas, and so we're going to go ahead and put you in auditing and let you start off there. And from there, once I gained enough expertise in auditing, I started branching out, taking on tax returns and other such items. In fact, most of the, I believe one of my hardest items getting my head wrapped around was just how auditing functions with the client's books. auditing has a lot of restrictions on independence. I don't know if you all have had that hammered into your heads yet for auditing, but auditing, we can't make managerial decisions for them. We have to be independent simply because if we are making decisions, we are a little biased whenever we say, yes, that's a good decision. Of course it is, I made it. So they don't allow you to do that. So you have to have a certain amount of distance between you and any decision. So learning what, not only learning what journal entries you're expecting to see, but knowing which ones you can propose. So if you just see like that they haven't done their depreciation for the year, that's something that you can go ahead, do the calculation and let them know, hey, I calculated your depreciation to be this amount. Is it all right if I go ahead and book that for you? 9 times out of 10, they'll say yes, because they don't want to calculate it. But if they give you something and you notice they have this amount of cash received for the year, but they booked triple that amount of revenue, that's something that you really, have to kind of toss back to the client. But you still need to be knowledgeable enough that whenever they say, okay, well, here's the fix, and they give you an entry, you need to be knowledgeable enough to be able to look at that entry, gauge if it's effective, and understand what the intention was. Was that a mistake that they gave you? Most of the time, we have, knock on wood, never caught fraud whenever we have been auditing someone. Mainly that's because our partners are pretty risk averse. We don't bring on clients that we think would be duplicitous or shady. But again, you have to have enough knowledge to be able to look at something and decide, okay, well, here's the fix, but does it make sense? That was very difficult in the beginning to actually take that extra step, because if you toss it onto a controller that has 10 years of experience and they hand you something that says, all right, here's the fix, it's really easy to just say, great, that's a fix, and then file it away. And then normally the partner or the manager, whoever's reviewing that audit, is going to kick it back to you and just say, okay, well, why does it make sense? And you have to document that. Wrapping your head around these journal entries, that took me a bit of time to kind of figure out. And also just the relationship that we have with the client. We are still an external entity to them. Tax can be a little bit more familiar with the client and what they do, just because tax, there isn't an independence requirement. Tax can take on a lot more work for the client, as far as even just keeping their books for them, period, amen. Whereas auditing, you can't do that. So you have to have a certain amount of independence among your work and among your viewpoints whenever you're dealing with that. And that took a little bit of getting used to. And I'm sorry, did that answer your question? I know you started with the question of how did I wind up in this? And that was really, the answer is it's going to be depending on what firm you join. Most firms will start you off as kind of just an associate level, and you're not really so much audit or tax. Some do, some don't. But most firms will want to try and give you a little bit experience in everything, and with hopefully the opportunity of letting you pick your specialization. Sometimes you got to work where you got to work. If we had, let's say we lost two tax, let's say we lost 2 tax personnel and you just joined. Bad news, you're probably going to tax for first year, even if you don't want to do that. But if you stay there and they like you, you do good work, you put in effort. Most firms are happy to help out and get you where you want to be, just because if you're happy, you're likely to stay.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Anything else we want to talk about? I try to stay on task, but as whenever I start talking about that stuff, it's easy to there's so many things that I could pitch in. It's kind of hard to stay focused on the exact topic, just because with this stuff, in my experience, I didn't know how broad the profession was whenever I initially graduated. I think there's something just for everyone. If you wanted to just sit at a desk, not deal with people and just crunch numbers all day. There's jobs for that, like industry jobs, nonprofits, and government works really well with that. If you have trouble keeping your mouth shut and you like talking to everybody like I do, public accounting is good for that, just because you're dealing with clients all day long. In fact, there's often times where I wish I could get a little bit more work done, but I have people calling and asking questions and seeking advice here and there. So you definitely get to be a little bit more social and a little bit more involved with the community and the people that you're working with in public. I speak to literally hundreds of people throughout the year during the course of just work. Whereas if you go into government, if you go into public, or excuse me, if you go into industry, or if you go into nonprofit, there's a chance you might just be sitting in an office working on Excel reports, dealing with the same people year after year, which is fine if you like those people, but sometimes you might want a little variety. Anything else?
Yeah, I do have.
I think covered most of
If you
it.
don't mind.
What was that?
Yeah, I do have one more question.
Yeah,
if you don't
fire
mind. And I noticed in a lot of career paths, it seems like once you go up higher management, sometimes you start doing less technical things, and you would do a little bit more communication. Make sure projects are on time, more leadership things, talking to clients. Have you noticed that same pattern in public accounting, or do you do a lot of technical things still?
That it tends to skew a little bit. The smaller the firm, the harder it is to get away from actual just technical work. In fact, I do a fair amount of technical work still, and I actually try to get away with that. I try to get away from that just because a lot of times I want to do it just because I know how it's done. And I know I can do it quickly. In fact, there's been multiple times where I'm halfway through a project and I think, I know how to do this. I could have handed it off. It's simple enough for me to give to somebody else, but I already started it. I'm well-versed enough in Excel formulas that I can automate a lot of my work. And actually, I spent about an hour and a half just the other day teaching someone how the formulas in one of my worksheets work so they can start using it in their items. But the higher up you go, usually you deal with more oversight and review work, as well as communication, planning, and decision making. And that's going to be true for just about anywhere you go. The higher up you go, the more decision making you're looking at, the more planning, the more budgeting, and also the more review work that you're probably going to be looking at. In public accounting, I mean, I've been doing this 11 years, even something that I've been doing every day for 11 years, we always have two sets of eyes look at something. Just because if let's say you've been working in Excel for 7 hours on a project, your eyes can glaze over very easily and miss something very simple. I've had that happen before. I've had a partner that's been working here for 15 years give me something and we had a glaring error on it that I saw immediately. He didn't see it because he'd been doing it for the past 7 or 8 hours. So the higher up you are, the more likely you're going to be given that type of work to where they know that you know what to look for, you know what's wrong, you've done it enough to where you know where the mistakes usually are, and they're going to give you that work to look at and review. The more technical work, we try to hand off to staff that usually hasn't had that much experience in it or needs more work in that type of technical work. Simply, a lot of my Excel, I get a little carried away with my formulas. So I'll normally try and hand off those. I'll try and hand off those templates to newer staff so they can see the formulas, so they can start working with them and figuring items out there. With auditing, a lot of things we do requires, you've probably heard the term auditor's judgment if you've had any auditing classes, or professional judgment. And that does play a big part in what we do. So we normally try and hand off that type of work to staff to give them an idea of, here's where we've had an issue before that needed a decision. Here was the reasoning behind it. This is why we went with it. Sometimes it's a simple if-then formula that says if an account fluctuated by this much, okay, we'll start asking questions about it. But other times we actually have to write out a paragraph or two of what happened, what the client said happened, and why we think it's okay or if it isn't. So we try to hand off that type of work to the people that need the experience in it. And then if everybody has experience and we don't think there's anybody that really needs that type of work hammered home, it's just whoever has the most convenient time and will be able to knock it out. We also have to, at a firm, you have to be a little cognizant of what people's hourly rates are as well. Someone that, like me, I've been in the profession for 11 years. I've been in public for 6 years. My rate is going to be charged out at a higher rate than someone that just came on a year or two ago and doesn't have their CPA, which is another reason why I try not to just sit there and do technical work, because I'm billing the client more than they need. And at the same time, the managing partner, Mr. Terry Fyffe, who's been doing this for, almost 40 years. Actually, I think over 40 years. As you can guess, he bills out a little higher than me. So we're not going to be giving him Excel formulas to just sit there and punch in and then bill a client too. So there's a lot of dynamics you have to think of as well. If it's something simple that I can complete in a half hour and I'm not going to need to do over and over and over again, I'll probably just do that myself. Because if it takes me an hour to train somebody and then we're not going to have to do it again, that's going to be at a loss too. The only exception is if they really need to know that and they're going to benefit from it, we'll normally wrangle them up. So there's a lot of items that kind of go into that decision-making process of who does what. And while we try to consider, we want to make sure everybody knows the ropes, they know everything that they can, just because the more useful they are, the more efficient they are. You have to kind of make a decision sometimes too. The smaller firms, especially, everybody kind of has to have multiple different hats that they have to wear just to get stuff done if things catch up. The bigger firms, they have normally a much more structured hierarchy. At this rank, you only do this, this, or this, et cetera, et cetera. Is there anything else? I know I think we started at 5:15, so I don't want to, if I'm getting long-winded, feel free to cut me off and let me know. Well, if there's nothing else, I think that covered my broad view of what I think, every facet of accounting, I believe, in summary, has something for someone, regardless of what you're looking for. I know whenever I got out of college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. The government job was a good fit for me, just while I tried to figure it out what I actually wanted to do with my degree. Other people know exactly what they want. They've been living off of college wages for the last 4 to 6 years, and they need some money in their pockets. So they jump right into public and get as much as they can and move up as fast as they can. It really just, it's something you need to sit down and figure out, what do you think is going to be a good fit for you?
So does anybody have any more questions? No? Well, I really don't have any more announcements that I've already made. Les, do you have anything else?
I believe that covered most of it. Unless there's any more questions, I feel I'd probably just be repeating myself. So I'll save you all the torment.
I found it extremely interesting how most accounting people that you talk to, especially the ones in public, got a public accounting internship and just kind of filtered their way in. It was interesting to see your career path and how you ended up where you did. I found it very interesting.
I did too, unintentionally. It's as I said, I kind of wandered around a little bit before I found some place that I could, found a good balance of, I can speak with people, I can get work done, and public accounting pays well, especially around here, anywhere, really. It's one of those jobs that you can take just about anywhere you go. I mean, West Virginia has a need for accountants just the same as California, Alaska, Maine, just about anywhere you could go. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you guys for letting me come out and talk your ear off for about an hour.
Definitely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.